Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to We Are Free TV, the channel of the people, by the people, for the people. We normally host on this channel a variety of guests. Anything goes pretty much, as long as it's not instigating violence or libel against another person or just bad-mouthing any other person is not acceptable. Other than that, anything goes. Aliens, channeling, new age subjects, alternative medicine, alternative nutrition, medicine, as I said, the fifth dimension, higher frequency, quantum physics, quantum mechanics, holographic universe, anything you want, psychedelics, shamanism, shamanic practices, you name it, this is the place to talk about it. So all you need to do is contact us and tell us who you are and what you want to talk about, and then we can arrange for the interview. And also I'd like to thank the viewers that have donated and do donate on a regular basis. Thank you very much. The details are up here. If you wish to donate by PayPal, bank transfer, etc., it's all up there. Thank you very much. We heavily are dependent on your donations, and therefore we highly appreciate them. Thank you very much. Also, we have a website called wearefree.tv. You may go there by typing We Are Free TV without the dot in Google. We come up first. You can then click on it, click on Join Us, give us your email, and then you'll be on our mailing list. So every time a new interview comes out, you'll be notified by email. Also, we have a lovely Telegram group that's growing daily. The name is No Censorship TV. Please join it. We don't chit-chat there or just waste your time. We just add links to every new interview as it comes out. So thank you very much for that. And of course, please feel free to share this interview wherever you possibly can. If you're watching this on YouTube, please click the subscribe button, which is also a very helpful thing for you and for us. And that's it. So today, my guest is from Hawaii. His name is Dr. Michael Salla. He is no regular person at all. He is an independent researcher and author on exopolitics and secret space programs. The name of our interview today is Space Force and Our Star Trek Future. A talk with Dr. Michael Salla on Space Force, Artemis Accords, Star Trek, Future, and more. So, hello there, Dr. Michael Salla. How are you today?
Aloha, Michael. I'm glad to be here, and thanks for having me on your show.
It's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure. So, exopolitics? What on earth is that?
Well, it was modeled on the idea of exobiology. I was very interested in the political aspects of extraterrestrial life, and because my background is in political science, I have degrees and I've taught in political science, I thought, well, if you're going to be studying extraterrestrial life in terms of political science, what do you call it? And I thought, well, if the biologists call the study of extraterrestrial biology exobiology, well then we should call it exopolitics. So that's how I started to use the term, just as another branch of politics, like international politics or regional politics or comparative politics. You have exopolitics.
What's exobiology?
It's the study of extraterrestrial biology.
So exopolitics means basically politics of aliens and stuff like that.
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
Exobiology. I think the term began to be used by the United Nations in the 1960s, when they started to think about what would life outside of the Earth be like, and so they came up with this new discipline, exobiology. So that was the precedent.
Amazing. Now, can you give us a background about yourself, please, before we dive straight into these amazing subjects?
Sure. I was a full-time professor in international politics at American University in Washington, D.C., and I was teaching international peace and conflict resolution. And in 2001, I saw the Disclosure Project press conference, and to me, it just kind of blew my mind wide open, because I saw people testifying about projects and programs that they were a part of that really, to me, just opened up, what is really happening on our planet. And it means that we really need to, if we're going to understand international politics, we have to understand, well, how does extraterrestrial life factor in?
I see. Okay. I mean, that's amazing, because I mean, I have so much proof that, extraterrestrial life exists. I mean, I've been to channelers. I've been following channelers online, who channel different aliens from different star systems. And I've personally been to channelings. And my therapist, who's a doctor of psychology, is also a channel. So half of my therapy session is like, conventional therapy. And then the second half is like, well, let's see what they can say about that. And then she goes like this and goes, hello, good afternoon to you. We would like to tell you, blah, 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 blah. And it's all amazing stuff about me that there's no way she could possibly know, or they could know, or whoever they are. And I've interviewed channelers on this show many times, and I've actually interviewed the aliens themselves through the channelers in Hebrew, in English. It's just, wow, it's all out there. I mean, I'm a believer. Are you a believer? Why are you a believer?
Yeah, well, I was convinced. I was, up until 2001, I always thought extraterrestrial life was somewhere out there in the galaxy. But in 2001, I learned that they're here, they're interacting with us, but it's being covered up at the highest level by all major governments on the planet.
How did you learn that? How did you come across that information again? Did you say?
It was the Disclosure Project press conference that was held in 2001 by Dr. Stephen Greer. He organized that, and it was televised over the web at the time. It was a very big webcast, and I saw that, and it had 21 witnesses, people who worked at various levels of government or in the military or in the aviation industry, and they all came forward with their stories and their experiences concerning UFOs and extraterrestrial life.
But that's what I mean. What actually was said in that conference? Just give us a few things. You can say, oh, that guy said that he was on a ship and he remembers hugging the alien, or I don't know what.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, some of the witnesses talked about, just UFO sightings. Like there was one, a famous Japanese airline that saw a big UFO, and the pilots, and there was the pilot testimonies. There was radar. So that case was discussed. There was also cases of NASA footage from the Apollo missions that showed these structures on the far side of the moon, and witnesses were told to scrub those out for public release. I mean, the people that were testifying said that they saw these things, and that they said that there was a process to scrub them out prior to release, so that rather than seeing some sort of structure on the moon, people would see a blur.
Okay.
So, and also another person said that they were part of an elite crash retrieval team that would go to different parts of the United States or other parts of the planet where flying saucers crashed, and that they went there to kind of like get control of the debris, ship it all over to the US, and silence anyone that witnessed it.
And did they explain why they were silencing, why this was covered up, and why it's not out in the open in that conference? What's the official story or explanation?
Well, what they said was that this is government policy, that this has been a policy that's been in place for many, many decades. So
what's the motive behind the policy? Any idea?
Well, what they said was that was the policy. I can speculate as to how it began. That it began probably because they were very embarrassed to talk about flying saucers being in existence with advanced technologies that were far superior to anything that the military had, which would be more or less a confession that militarily and technologically we are inferior to these witnesses, and so we're not going to admit that.
Really? You really believe that? That's the reason?
I think I think that would be one.
Okay.
I think that would be one, the military mindset. The other would be the economic, like if these technologies were revealed, that visitors from other solar systems were coming into our planet or coming into our solar system using these technologies that we would call them like free energy or something very different to fossil fuels, it would revolutionize the energy industry. So fossil fuels would become redundant, and so those major corporations, Shell and Exxon and all of the major oil companies, that they would be threatened, because now all of a sudden people would be able to create some sort of new energy technologies based on what the extraterrestrial visitors were using.
I see.
So I think that was another. And then there's the religious, which is probably a big one, which is that people would be introduced to the idea that many thousands of years ago, the Elohim were actually extraterrestrial visitors, that they weren't like a singular or powerful being, that these were actually extraterrestrials visiting us and basically conducting genetic experiments with the primitive hominids on Earth and creating Homo sapiens.
Which is you and me.
Yes.
The result of those genetical experiments, with DNA or whatever, engineering. Okay, interesting. Now, have you had any personal experiences with aliens?
Not really, no, I haven't. I up until 2001, I was pretty much a conventional scholar. I hadn't had any experiences that made me think that this was any field that had any kind of serious kind of weight to it. So it was only when I saw that press conference that I became interested.
Clear.
And afterwards, I've had a few experiences. Nothing really dramatic.
What?
Like I've seen lights in the sky. I've seen like pulsing lights, something that would just like pulse. Like you would send a telepathic command to it and say, well, if you're one of the visitors, show me, and then it would pulse.
Wow.
Or it would zigzag. A white light that would zigzag and move.
Okay.
But
Excellent.
kind of like we would call those close encounters, I guess, of the first kind, where you just see something at a distance. But I haven't seen anything. Like I haven't seen an ET ship land and the ETs come out.
What about channeling?
Talk to me.
Have you heard of channelers and the channeling?
Oh yes. Have
you heard any?
Oh yes, I've heard many channels, and very interesting. I think it's a valid form of communication. I think you get some really interesting intelligence from it. But from a perspective of a researcher, it's like an intelligence analyst. You got to weight things. You got to high confidence, medium level confidence, low confidence. This is bunk. And with intelligence gathering, that's what you do, because you can never know for sure. So if you hear a channeler tell you something, it's like, well, you can't be certain, because the channeler might be telling you what they really are hearing, but you don't know what's on the other side. They could be a spirit, a discarnate spirit pretending to be an extraterrestrial.
Absolutely. That's why the best thing is, and many good channelers say that, or whatever is being channeled, they normally say, well, you don't have to believe us that we are aliens or anything. Just listen to the message, and if you relate to it, then take what you need from it and enjoy yourself and do good. If you don't, then just don't worry. Don't bother. So that's good stuff. Now, you mentioned that you mentioned the moon. And I wanted to ask, the moon is a very controversial thing. Some people say that the moon doesn't even exist. What do you think?
Oh yeah, definitely the moon exists, and we have sent various space missions there. The Apollo, and of course the Chinese and the Russians have also sent missions up there. But the thing was that many of the Apollo missions actually took photos of the moon. Like the orbiters took a lot of photos of the moon, and many of those photos had to go through a scrubbing process before they were released. So they were always sanitized. And that was one of the things that very much impressed me, that there were two people involved in this 2001 press conference that were working with NASA, working with the NSA, and they said that they were made familiar with this process that NASA has of scrubbing all of the Apollo film footage of anything on the moon that showed, say, some sort of artifact or a spacecraft, anything at all that looked artificial. They would they would use some kind of blurring technology and just blur it out.
Yep.
And then they would release it.
Okay. Right, so that's the moon. Now, can you please tell us about the US Space Force?
Yes, wow, that's a really big initiative because it's creating the opportunity for a multinational space alliance to be formed around the US, where they have a lot of these advanced technologies that were secretly reverse engineered and used in classified programs, and kind of like were sequestered away from the rest of humanity. So in a way, we live in kind of like a segregated society. You have us, where we use like fossil fuels and like very primitive pharmaceutical and healing technologies to heal ourselves. In the Kardashevs, Nikolai Kardashev came up with a categorization of different levels of civilization based on energy consumption. So using the Kardashev scale, we are at around 0.7%. But there is a breakaway civilization using advanced electrogravitic technologies, using torsion field technologies, electromagnetic healing and holographic healing technologies. And that's kind of like a breakaway civilization that has all of these spacecraft and has space stations operating in Earth orbit, but kept very secret. And they also have a very large, complex network of underground magnetic levitation trains that link countries on the continents and even under the oceans. This is how sophisticated it's become. So really, we live in a very segregated society where you and I and most listening to this, we live in the so-called kind of like open source or white world where very little of these advanced technologies are released. But in the what's called the black world and the very heavily classified world, all of the major countries and companies as well all share these technologies and develop them and have these bases where they can share their breakthroughs and their ideas, and that's all done in a very highly compartmentalized way.
Okay, but they're humans like you and me. They're just the elite.
Totally, exactly. They're just the elite. Like in the movie Elysium, I think that's a very, very nice way of kind of encapsulating the idea that you have one tier of humanity which has all these advanced technologies, and it's the elite, and they live in a very sequestered, highly protected areas, and off planet as well. And then you have the rest of us that kind of like really compete over scarce resources, and we have difficulty kind of like living beyond 70, 80 years. With these advanced technologies, you can live 200, 300, 400 years. I mean, that's really the kind of advanced healing technologies that exist out there.
So what's that got to do with the US Space Force?
Well, the Space Force is one way for having these technologies come out of the world of highly classified intelligence and covert programs into kind of like normal defense. So in other words, as Space Force takes off, as it begins to perform its functions to kind of like dominate space on behalf of the United States and its allies, they're going to release these technologies. This will be one of the things that the military demands, because you can't protect Earth from, say, if we're talking about extraterrestrials, you can't protect Earth using rockets fueled by kerosene or methane. That dates from the 1940s. I mean, the Nazis were using kerosene, and you have Elon Musk and the Spacex using kerosene-propelled rockets. So it's like, well, how can this be? How can in over 70 years our propulsion technology hasn't developed? Using kerosene in the 40s for rocket propulsion, and they're using kerosene now for the Dragon rocket launchers. No, there's been secret developments for propulsion technologies. And one of the ideas behind Space Force is that this is going to force the release of these advanced technologies, because the people running Space Force, they're military, and they say, look, we can't do our jobs. If our job is to protect the United States and its allies from foreign adversaries or even off-planet aliens, we need to have these advanced technologies to do our job. And so this is what I think is one of the reasons for the creation of Space Force.
So I'm trying to understand what you said. So there is the Space Force, the US Space Force, and let's talk about, there's the official story, and then there's the secret story. So the official story is we are a Space Force to protect Earth against invasions and all that. And the official story is probably, well, we have scientists and we develop different technologies to do that. Now, you said there's another group, which I'm not sure if it's related or not, which is the elite, that have a lot of advanced technologies and build their own cities under the ground and trains and all that, and they have all these medical technologies. Are they linked to the Space Force in any way, or is it two separate groups? And then the question would be, well, where do these technologies come from? Where do the elite take them from, or get them from, and where does Space Force take them from?
They are two very separate groups. The elites that have been using these technologies, I mean, those technologies date back many, many decades. Space Force is very new, and it's been set up with these kind of like conventional goals of protecting the satellite grid, like the GPS system and space assets of the US and its allies, against foreign adversaries, China and Russia. And that's the idea. And the official idea is that they're going to use conventional rocket propulsion to do this. But in reality, those that are running Space Force, they know that there are these classified technologies that have been developed by major aerospace companies like Lockheed Martin, like Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics, that they've developed these technologies, and that they have been building some of these anti-gravity propelled craft, but very few, relatively few. And the reason was because space was always defined as a benign environment. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty defines space as a benign environment. And so the rationale was, well, if space is a benign environment, then, we can't put like hundreds of military spacecraft up there, but we can have some up there for like surveillance purposes or conducting covert operations. So space was considered a benign environment, and the US space programs in the Air Force and in the Navy built relatively few spacecraft that use these technologies, really for just like intelligence gathering and for covert operations. But now, under President Trump, space was redefined from a benign environment to a warfighting domain. This was a big shift in military strategy. And that was only made possible because of Donald Trump, because he was convinced that the way the US looked at space had to shift, that Russia and China were doing all these things out there, and so we need to now consider space to be a warfighting domain. So that shifted the military mindset in the United States, where now space is a warfighting domain, and so the mindset is now, okay, so space is no longer a benign environment where we just do some intelligence gathering and some covert operations. Now it's a warfighting domain. We need to establish space supremacy.
War fighting against who? Against the Russians or against the aliens?
Well, that's what they're saying at the moment. It's against the Russians and the Chinese. Uh-huh. But in truth, and what we're seeing right now in the United States is that right now, the unidentified aerial phenomena that has been covered a lot in the mainstream media, that's getting a lot of press coverage because starting in June, sometime in June, the intelligence community in the US is going to release a comprehensive report on unidentified aerial phenomena. And many that have been looking at those that are familiar with the mindset and the thinking behind it is that it's going to present these UFOs as a threat. And maybe they'll say they're alien. Maybe they'll just kind of leave it like vague. It could be Russian, could be Chinese, or could be alien, kind of leave it vague. But, these are out there. They're kind of like, interfering with military operations. They're kind of interfering with nuclear weapons. And so what we need to do is protect ourselves, on Earth and in space from these UAPs. And so that's where you're going to have this push to like build all these advanced spacecraft for the Space Force to establish space supremacy.
I see. So basically, now I understand. I believe what you said is that so these members of the U.S. Space Force are aware that Lockheed Martin and Boeing and all these companies have been developing secretly these advanced propulsion technologies, which were used by the elites only. So now these high-ranked officials in the space program are saying, well, look, in order for us to actually take action and do what you, Trump, want us to do and establish supremacy, we need to get our hands on those technologies. So these elites need to kind of share this with us, They can't keep it to themselves anymore. And therefore, what does that mean to the common man? Nothing. It just means that we ain't going to have it, and just the elites are going to have it, and the Space Force will have it to allegedly fight some imaginary war in space against our imaginary enemies that are not really our enemies. It's just a political thing where they want, to separate us and to make the people believe that the Chinese are bad and the Russians are bad. And like in Israel, the Arabs, oh my God, they're the worst, But when an Arab meets an Israeli, we're best mates, there's no problem. It's a lie that we need to bring peace. They keep saying, oh, we need to bring peace. But there is peace. I have no war between me and any Arab. It's just another lie. But anyway, I'm digressing. So we've established all that. That's interesting. Now, what about SpaceX? What can you say about that? What is it?
Well, yeah, SpaceX is very, very interesting. I mean, I think SpaceX and Elon Musk in particular are being nurtured to kind of like help bridge this gap between where we are technologically right now and where we need to be in order to be like an advanced spacefaring civilization where we use these advanced technologies. And Elon Musk is being supported to come up with these technologies, such as reusable rockets. Also coming up with the electric car, because at some point the rocket industry is going to have to go through a similar transformation from liquid propulsion to electromagnetic propulsion. And because Elon Musk did it with the car industry, so he's the ideal person to be able to do it with the rocket industry. And all of this is, we're watching this slowly unfold, because the rationale is now that, well, if space is going to be considered a warfighting domain and there are these threats out there that use all of these advanced technologies that zip around, the so-called UAPs, then the leaders in the Space Force say that, well, we have a need to know for these technologies. So, people in Lockheed and Northrop Grumman now will be obliged to share that technology, because in the US, the way you get access to advanced technologies is you need to demonstrate need to know. And if you can demonstrate that on behalf of your military command, then you can actually get access to it. And so this, I think, is how Space Force is going to be able to get access to it, and then they're going to really milk the American taxpayer for billions of dollars to start building, like 300 squadrons of anti-gravity craft that can establish space supremacy, because that's what you need. Because the US Air Force, it has approximately 317 squadrons to establish air supremacy all over the planet. That's the US Air Force. Uh-huh. So to do the same thing in space, you need at least 300 squadrons of anti-gravity craft.
So what's SpaceX? You just said the US Space Force, but I was asking about SpaceX.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think SpaceX is going to be the bridge, is going to be how you're going to go from this world of rocket propulsion to electromagnetic propulsion.
I see. Because you say Elon Musk knows how to do it with cars, then he's the man to know how to do it with rockets as well. So he's going to become even richer, and the army is going to get, the space program is going to get the special propulsion. Although you say it already exists. You said Lockheed Martin already did it. So we just have to bang on their door and say, give it to us. We don't need Elon Musk to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Well, what will probably happen is that someone like Elon Musk will be given the blueprints for these technologies.
From the elites.
And he'll build it. And he'll build it.
So they'll nick it from the elites and give it to Elon Musk and say, build the bloody thing.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. And that's what he'll do, because he's doing that now, with his Starship. He's coming up with this prototype spacecraft that is going to return Americans to the moon in 2024. That's his Starship, which is currently under development. So that'll be ready by 2024 to deliver the first Americans to the moon, publicly at least. And then after that, he's going to start doing missions to Mars. But he's going to start mass producing these Starships. They'll be put into mass production because this will be like brand new technology. And so they're going to start using that. And then at some point, they're going to start unrolling these advanced anti-gravity technologies. And so people like Musk will start building that, for whether it's civilians or whether it's for the military, he'll start building those.
I see. Okay, clear. So now I'd like to talk about another gentleman who you were involved with. So first I'll introduce him. His name is Haim Eshed, an Israeli man, and he is a retired brigadier general in the Israeli military intelligence. Eshed was director of space programs for Israel Ministry of Defense for nearly 30 years. He's a former chair of the Space Committee of the National Council for Research and Development for the Ministry of Science, Technology and Space, and a member of the Steering Committee of Israel's Space Agency. Eshed is responsible for the launch of 20 Israeli-made satellites, and he's widely cited as the father of Israel's space program. So, tell us about this man, and tell us about the interview that you had with him, please.
Well, he's a very serious person in terms of his background, involvement with Israel's space agency and setting up the Israel's first 20 satellites. And in that capacity, he worked very closely with his peers from the United States. We're talking about the National Reconnaissance Office and NASA in terms of sending satellites up there. And he was someone that wrote a book and did an interview with an Israeli news journal, and that interview went viral. So I didn't personally interview him. I just read the interview, the transcription of it, and he said some really interesting things about visiting extraterrestrial life, and he also talked about a galactic federation that existed, and that this federation was in touch with Donald Trump, and told Trump, because Trump apparently was considering revealing the truth about extraterrestrial life to the American public and to the world, but the extraterrestrials told him, no, hold on, humanity isn't ready yet. Technologically, they are not at that point yet where you can release this kind of information to them. The technology has to evolve more. So, that could be one of the reasons behind why Trump proposed the creation of Space Force, because Space Force, the real goal behind Space Force, and why the US is supporting people like Elon Musk and SpaceX, is to really drive forward the release of these advanced technologies that have been kept locked up in decades in these compartmentalized programs run by different military agencies and corporations. And so Trump wanted to accelerate that. So Space Force was the reason that he could do that. And that is really a good way to accelerate the level of technological development on our planet is that you create something like Space Force, you create a multinational alliance around it, which is now being formed, and as a result of that, all of these advanced space technologies that were secretly built will now have to be released, or at least kind of like reinvented and put into operation. Because now you're not going to have like one Apollo rocket going up there every 2 years. It'll be like hundreds of rockets every year, hundreds of space vehicles being sent up, not by one space agency, but by multiple space agencies and by multiple corporations. Because you got, like in the United States, you got Spacex, Blue Origin is another one. You got Virgin Galactic. Then you got Boeing and Lockheed. So you got multiple corporations that are all developing craft, and all of them are going to be pushing these new technologies, to compete against one another, so they can get out further, do mining, and use advanced space technologies.
Yeah, even gold mining. I heard there are asteroids that are just pure gold. Okay, so what about Eshed? So did you finish about Eshed?
Well, that was the thing that was very interesting about him, was that he revealed that this Galactic Federation was in touch with Donald Trump and had said that these advanced technologies will be released. Should be released.
Good.
In order for us to kind of like be ready for the Galactic Federation to reveal itself. So it seems that, we're going through a phase here where we have these advanced technologies released that gets us up to a certain technological level, and then this Galactic Federation reveals itself, and then we kind of like propelled into this kind of like Star Trek future where we, zipping off into space with these advanced propulsion technologies, and we are now working alongside different extraterrestrial civilizations.
Which is my next question, how it all connects to a Star Trek future. So maybe you could expand on that. I mean, do you have your own theory? Let's jump 20 years into the future. How do you see things?
Sure. Well, actually jump 40 years.
Okay.
Let's jump 40 years because in 2019, there was a workshop that was conducted by what was Space Force's predecessor. That was called Air Force Space Command, NASA, the NRO, the European Space Agency, and experts from other space agencies or from around the world. They were part of a Space Futures workshop that was held in Washington, D.C., and their job was to look 40 years into the future. And the idea was, what's going to happen 40 years into the future? And they came up with 8 scenarios, and this, all based on civil, economic, and military. Using those 3 criteria, they came up with 8 scenarios, and the most optimal scenario was a Star Trek future. So that was something that that I, in this book that I just wrote, that's how I came up with the idea of our Star Trek future, because that was the preferred future of this this workshop with all of these different representatives from different government agencies, space agencies. So that's what they wanted. And the Star Trek future would be one where, in terms of civil, in that criteria, that would be optimized, because civil, you would have like many thousands of people flying out in space. Economically, you would have like a flourishing space economy, like over $1 trillion. Space mining, space tourism, space medicine, over $1 trillion economy. And then you would have the third criteria was military. And that would be optimized because you would have a multinational military alliance. And that's what we're seeing now with the Artemis Accords and with NATO creating a space center in Ramstein, where, you would kind of, essentially you would have a space NATO, where at its core you would have the United States, and around it you would have all of the nations that have signed on to the Artemis Accords, all being part of this multinational space alliance that would be cooperating in the civil, in the economic, and in the military to really create this Star Trek future. That's the vision from that Space Futures workshop from 2019, and I kind of used that information for this book that just came out.
Wonderful. So what's the Artemis Accord?
Well, the Artemis Accords are a set of bilateral accords that the US has signed with, I think at the moment it's 10 nations. 10 nations, and these are bilateral, so it means the US will sign one, like it signed an accord with Britain, it signed an accord with Australia, it signed an accord with Italy. So it's signing accords with each country individually. And the reason it's doing that is because the United States knows that in order to maintain its privileged role in terms of space and its number one role, that you want to avoid a multilateral agreement where, like for example, in 1967 you had the Outer Space Treaty negotiated by the United Nations with all of these different countries signing on, where the US doesn't really have much control. It's just like one amongst many others. But with bilateral agreements where all the interested nations sign a bilateral agreement with the United States, that means the United States has agreements with all of these different nations. And so it's the United States that is the anchor for it all. And it makes the United States the kind of privileged space power, and which makes sense because at the moment the United States has the world's biggest, economy and military. Maybe not for long because China's catching up very, very quick, which is why it wants a multinational alliance, because space strategists understand that China, in 10 years' time, China will have a bigger economy and they'll have a bigger military. And so the only way to counter China for the US is to form this multinational alliance where all of the major countries all are working in this coalition that's centered around the United States, exactly how NATO was created.
Yeah, just like they did with the money, with the dollar being the default international currency. Now they want that. Okay. So can you tell us about the reverse engineering of captured alien technologies by corporate contractors? Yes,
that's been going on for a very long time. People are probably very familiar with the Roswell crash, 1947, very famous incident, flying saucer crash near the town of Roswell. What they might not be too familiar with is that there were various companies and scientific groups created to study the retrieved technologies and to begin the reverse engineering process. That one of the groups that was created by the United States Air Force was called the Scientific Advisory Board. And that was created specifically to study all of these advanced technologies that the US was getting in the kind of mid to late 1940s from different parts of the planet. And, and this group was to study that and then come up with a strategy or a plan for how to develop these for future spacecraft that the Air Force and the Navy would be able to use for different things. So the reverse engineering began in the 40s and the 50s. Major corporations like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and General Dynamics, all of these all began to collaborate on studying these technologies. And in the 50s and the 60s, they began their first prototypes. And so by the 1970s, they were coming out with functional spacecraft that could be used using these anti-gravity technologies, using principles like high voltage electrostatics, torsion field physics, these advanced kinds of technologies where they could propel a craft very, very differently and much more efficiently and much more powerfully than anything that rocket propulsion can do. So this was something that's been underway for many, many decades now. And right now, I think in the United States, you have many corporations and different government agencies. We're talking the National Reconnaissance Office. We're talking about Air Force Space Command. We're talking about Space Force now, and all of these different and corporations have all a limited number of these advanced spacecraft that they've developed and they've deployed in space. But now we're going to go through a quantum jump from, rather than just having like a few squadrons of these things used for testing and research development and for espionage and covert operations. Now you're going to have like 300 or 400 squadrons being developed for space supremacy. So we're going to have a quantum jump over the next decade, and Space Force is going to be the key for that.
Yeah, clear. So what about people are talking about, especially in the spiritual community, about the great revealing or the great disclosure, that there will come a point where the truth will be disclosed to us, the people, about the existence of extraterrestrials and many other things. What do you think about that?
Well, that's going to be the big challenge, because right now, I think the way that the military is doing things through Space Force is that they want to release all of these advanced technologies in a kind of top-down way, where they're taken out of the hands, or they're prized away from corporations that have been developing these for the elite, and they're now kind of like putting it into mass production for this new branch of the military, Space Force. And so the idea will be that, well, these technologies are going to be essential for Space Force doing its mission. So a lot of these technologies are going to be kind of like classified still, but now they're going to be, people are going to see it, kind of like the B-2 bomber. The people know that the B-2 bomber or the F-17 stealth fighter, that the Air Force has all of these, like the F-27 craft that the Air Force has, that these use very advanced technologies, but people outside of the military don't have access to it. So that's going to be our challenge, is that while we don't want these technologies to just be prized away from the elite and the corporations that they work with, and just put into the hands of Space Force, which then kind of like monopolizes those technologies. We want these technologies to be made available to the civilian industry as well, so that so that you and your listeners, maybe in 5 years' time, you can book a cruise to Mars. You can get on, say, some space cruiser. You can go to Mars, because this has, some new electromagnetic propulsion technology, where all of these ocean cruisers are now retrofitted, so that now you just don't sail the seven seas. You can actually go up in a space. So the idea is that we want this to be white worlded, so that everyone can benefit, rather than the military monopolizing these technologies.
Hopefully. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, can you tell us about the black budget funding of secret space programs through the CIA?
Yes, well, one of the things that was fundamental to the creation of the CIA in 1947 was that it was given this unprecedented budgetary authority to be able to spend money without recourse to law, and that it could actually funnel money between different government agencies, and no one could ask questions. So that meant that the CIA, once it found a way to generate large amounts of money, it could move it through basically the CIA is like a giant money laundering operation. It could get money from CIA covert operations, such as insider trading on Wall Street, pump and dump economics. It could get it through kind of like skimming the pharmaceutical industry. It could get it through the drug trade, basically manipulating that. So the CIA, the estimate is that the CIA in any 1 year can raise nearly $1 trillion through all of these illicit activities. Those have been some of the estimates based on the amount of money that's being moved through the Pentagon, which is where a lot of these advanced technology projects are funded. So the CIA has this unique statutory authority to move money through all US government departments, siphon it all through the Pentagon, and then that money goes out to whatever project the CIA and the Pentagon want funded. So that's how the elite were able to get their funding for all of these advanced technology projects without the US Congress learning about it.
So,
because the CIA was the bag man.
Yeah, but you say it's like a money laundering operation. How is it being done? I mean, am I right to presume that what you're saying is that there's a law that says that the CIA doesn't need to declare anything? So if the CIA now transfers $1 billion to whatever account, they have the right. The income tax is not interested, the IRS is not interested, no one can ask questions. So they could make as much money as they like wherever they like, and then they can just send it and nobody's gonna check them.
Exactly, yes.
So that's easier than money laundering. With money laundering, at least you have to come up with a cunning plan and kind of make it look real, and you still have to kind of abide by the regulations in a clever way. Here, there's nothing. They could do whatever they like. They're above money laundering. It's the ultimate money laundering.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that is something anyone can check. You go to the 1949 CIA Act, and it's right there that CIA has this unique statutory authority to move money around without any auditing, without any government agency intervening, and no questions asked. And this was because in 1947 it was understood that to do this reverse engineering of all of these captured spacecraft, it was going to take a lot of money. But you couldn't just go to Congress and say, well, we need $100 billion. No questions asked, because Congress would say, well, no, we want to know. This is taxpayer money. So they understood that you needed to raise the money some other way. So that's why the CIA was given that unique statutory authority. No other government agency has that in the USA.
Everything you've been saying here sounds so, like, the cabal. Have you heard of the cabal and the Illuminati and the deep state, ruling us? Have you heard of all these I don't know if it's theories or if it's facts or whatever, because everything you're explaining here only points how real that is, that that we're manipulated and governed and ruled by the deep state and all that.
Well, that's been around for a long time. I mean, you go back even in the early 1900s, you go back and you see people like President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt, or President Woodrow Wilson in the early 1900s, talking about the invisible government, talking about a government behind the government that has all the power. So they were talking about it back then. So I think this has been around for a long time. What's different is that in the 1940s, you had all of these advanced technologies suddenly becoming available. And because the US and the rest of the planet had reached a level of technological sophistication where we could now fly out into space, now all of a sudden, the means was there for the elite to monopolize and hoard these technologies and make sure that only they had access to it.
I see.
And so that's been the big difference now. And now the big struggle is, well, we want to kind of like democratize this by making these technologies available to Space Force. And hopefully once it gets into the hands of Space Force, then, it can then be released to people like Elon Musk, who will then and other major civilian corporations like Blue Origin,
as you mentioned earlier. And I could also say that it makes sense, or it ties in very well with all these, with all the information or claims that Donald Trump is trying to destroy the elites, and he's trying to reveal them and to actually bring them down. So in his special, clever way, he basically created this idea that we need to have space supremacy, and it's a war zone now. So it's like putting pressure on them to release these technologies for the benefit of us, the people. So maybe Donald Trump is as good as they say that he is, and he has our best interests at heart, and he is fighting the elite again, on our behalf. So that's good. Again, remains to be seen. And I'd like to ask you one question about the secret agreements with extraterrestrial civilizations. Agreements? What, proper signed written agreements?
Well, that's there have been agreements. I mean, this is one of the things. I mean, Professor Eshed, he talked about agreements that were reached between the US and the extraterrestrials. So he talked about that in the interview he did. And also in my own independent research, I was able to find others that have been talking about these agreements that date from the Eisenhower administration, that President Eisenhower traveled to several military facilities where he met with representatives from different extraterrestrial civilizations, and that agreements were made eventually, and the extraterrestrials would help the US reverse engineer some of these technologies because they were like too advanced, and that's how some of these technologies were eventually developed with the assistance of extraterrestrials that were willing to help the US do that, but in exchange they got to abduct many thousands of people and conduct genetic experiments on them that apparently they view our genetics as valuable, which is corroborated by in the many hundreds of thousands of abduction reports in the US and around the world that and this is a result of these agreements.
I see. Wow, I was going to ask you, what's the nature of the agreement? The basic nature, basically, the government lets them abduct civilians and experiment on their DNA or learn about it, and they in return help us or help them, the governments, our rulers, decipher and reverse engineer the advanced technologies that were found through the Roswell crash. Okay, sounds like a good deal. As long as it's not me that they're abducting. Or you.
Right.
Wow.
Exactly.
What can I say? Dr. Michael Salla, we've covered everything thoroughly. It was very, very enjoyable. And now we've reached the point of the interview where I would like to ask you to please address directly from the bottom of your heart your fellow brothers and sisters all over the world, the English speakers, and address them with a request, suggestion, demand, or any message you'd like to convey to them. The stage is yours. Go ahead, please.
I think what we face right now is a future where either there's going to be this deep state that perpetuates this secrecy system if they're victorious in their program right now that we're seeing all around the world. I don't need to talk about it, but people are being locked down and all of that. That's a plan. The Great Reset, all of that. Then you have the white hats. The military people that are kind of like fighting the good fight. That want to restore the legitimate presidency in the US. Overturn illegitimate elections, all of that sort of thing, and release these advanced technologies. And right now we're kind of like we be presented with this dichotomy between, on the one hand, these evil deep state elites, and on the other hand, the white hats, the military. And I would say is that there's a third way here, and that is that we as individuals, we don't operate under the mindset of either of those two groups. Like the military, for the military, everything is a threat perception. Everything is all about, force readiness, being prepared to deal with this threat, and you kind of like manufacture the very enemy that you're trying to defend yourself with, by that thinking. And so, for me, as we want to become a galactic civilization, we have to go beyond, the mindset of the deep state and the elites. We have to go beyond the mindset of the military and their threat perception and their monopolization of national security issues. And we have to kind of like embrace ourselves as sovereign entities, representatives of the planet, of Gaia, and that we speak directly or forge relationships with these extraterrestrial visitors that are here and willing to negotiate with those that are in tune or in integrity with the planet, because Gaia is a living, breathing soul. The deep state won't tell you that. The military people are incapable of understanding that. So we know it from the core of our beings that Gaia is a living, breathing entity. And as we establish a heart connection with Gaia, the extraterrestrials will come to us and say, okay, what do you want us to do? And we'll say, reveal the truth, share all of the technologies. We need to lift humanity out of the blindness, out of the dark ages. And, but we need to kind of like really begin working with these positive extraterrestrial groups that are willing to engage with us, because ultimately we are the spokespersons of Gaia, and that's who they are going to come to. They're going to recognize us as the legitimate spokespersons of Gaia. So it doesn't matter if it's a 4-star general says, well, I represent the United States military and you got to listen to me. The extraterrestrials say, no, this group of people, they are in alignment with your planetary consciousness. We listen to them. So we need to foster that. We need to come together, forge a kind of global community where we start to reveal the truth about all of these technologies and also establish a deeper, meaningful connection with Gaia, with the planet, and higher consciousness.
Wow, that was so unexpected, let me tell you, because finally you brought out the spirituality at the end of the interview, and I was thinking along the way, should I ask him about spirituality and this and that? And here we go, you did it yourself. You couldn't have put it in a more clear way, which I highly appreciate, and I really enjoyed this interview. And I'd like to thank you, Dr. Michael Salla, for everything you've said here. Thank you very much, and good luck with the book and everything else you're involved in. Thank you.
Thank you, and aloha.
Excellent. And to our lovely viewers, thank you for viewing. If you wish to donate, the information is up here. I'm sure you enjoyed this interview as much as I did. Thank you for watching, and we shall meet in the next interview. Have a lovely day, and goodbye.